"I'm pregnant with your husband's baby." The words echoed through the ballroom so clearly that for a second I thought I had imagined them. Then I looked up. My cousin Ashley was standing near the stage holding the wireless microphone with both hands. Her face was flushed, her eyes bright with excitement and nerves. Around 200 people sat frozen at round tables covered with white linens and silver centerpieces. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even the band stopped playing. I was sitting 3 tables from the stage at the annual Children's Hope Hospital Charity Gala inside the Marriott downtown in Columbus, Ohio. And suddenly every pair of eyes in that ballroom was staring directly at me. I remember hearing the faint hum of the air conditioning, the clink of a wine glass somewhere near the back, the pounding of my own heartbeat. Ashley swallowed hard and looked straight at me. "I didn't want to do it this way," she said into the microphone, "but Linda deserves to know the truth." The room remained silent. Then she delivered the second blow. "The baby I'm carrying belongs to Eric, my husband." 15 years of marriage reduced to a single sentence. I slowly turned toward Eric. He was sitting beside me. His face had gone completely pale. He looked like a man who had just walked into traffic. I waited for him to laugh, to deny it, to call Ashley crazy. Instead, he stared at the floor. That told me everything. A few gasps floated through the crowd. Somebody whispered, "Oh my God." A woman near the front pulled out her phone. I should have felt surprised, but I didn't. Not really. I had been expecting some version of this moment for months, just not in front of half the city. I stood slowly from my chair. Ashley looked relieved. She honestly believed she had won. She thought she had cornered me, humiliated me, destroyed me. I looked directly at her. Then I smiled. Perfect timing. The expression on her face changed instantly. Confusion. Uncertainty. The reaction wasn't what she expected. Several guests exchanged puzzled looks. I sat back down. And then I waited. Because timing really was perfect. 6 months earlier, my life had looked completely different. I was 43 years old and owned a home staging company called Parker Home Interiors. Nothing glamorous. My team helped homeowners prepare houses for sale. We rearranged furniture, painted walls, hung artwork, made ordinary homes look inviting. Business was steady. I employed 6 people. Most days I drove around Columbus in my old Ford Explorer drinking coffee and listening to local radio. A normal life, at least that's what I thought. Eric worked in commercial sales for a building supply company. We met at church when I was 27. For years he was dependable, funny, the kind of man who remembered birthdays and fixed leaky faucets without being asked. Our marriage wasn't perfect. No marriage is. But we'd built a good life, or so I believed. Ashley had always been part of that life too. She was 9 years younger than me. Her mother was my Aunt Karen. After Ashley's father left when she was little, our family rallied around her. She spent weekends at our house, came on vacations with us, shared holidays. When she was 21 and struggling financially, Eric and I helped her with rent. I treated her like a younger sister. Maybe that's why the betrayal hurt so much. Not because it happened, because of who it came from. About a year before the gala, small things started bothering me. Nothing dramatic, just little pieces that didn't fit. Ashley suddenly showed up wherever Eric happened to be. Community events, cookouts, church fundraisers, neighborhood gatherings. Sometimes I'd walk into a room and conversations would stop. Other times I'd catch a glance that lingered too long. I told myself I was imagining things. People my age know how dangerous assumptions can be. So I ignored it. Then came the credit card charges. At first, they seemed harmless. A restaurant I didn't recognize. A boutique hotel outside Cincinnati. Several expensive gifts. When I asked Eric about them, he always had explanations. Business meetings. Client dinners. Work travel. I wanted to believe him. After 15 years of marriage, trust becomes a habit. But habits can blind you. The more I looked, the more questions appeared. I lost sleep. I became distracted at work. One afternoon, my assistant Jenna asked if I was feeling okay. Apparently, I'd spent 10 minutes searching for my glasses while they sat on top of my head. That was when I realized something was seriously wrong. I finally hired a private investigator. Even making the call made me feel guilty. Like I was betraying my husband. Funny how that works. The innocent person often feels guilty while searching for the truth. The investigator's name was Frank Donnelly, retired Columbus police detective. Gray hair, calm voice, no nonsense. 3 weeks later, he called me. "Mrs. Parker." He said, "I think you'd better come see this in person." The photos confirmed my worst fear. Eric and Ashley, restaurants, hotels, parking lots, holding hands, kissing. The affair was real. I remember sitting in Frank's office staring at those photographs while rain tapped against the window. Part of me wanted to scream. Part of me wanted to throw up. Part of me wanted to drive home and confront both of them immediately. But I didn't. Instead, I asked Frank a simple question. How long? He checked his notes. Looks like about 10 months. 10 months. Almost a year. The drive home felt endless. When I pulled into my driveway, Eric was mowing the lawn. He waved and smiled. I waved back. Then I sat in my car and cried until I couldn't cry anymore. Most people think revenge begins with anger. Mine started with heartbreak. For weeks I carried the secret alone. I went through the motions. Work, dinner, family gatherings, church on Sundays. Meanwhile, I quietly began preparing for a future that no longer included my husband. What I didn't know then was that Frank was about to uncover something even bigger, something neither Eric nor Ashley saw coming. And that discovery would eventually lead to the moment unfolding inside that ballroom. As guests whispered around me and Ashley stood frozen near the stage, I checked my watch. Almost time. Very soon someone would walk through those doors. Someone Ashley never expected to see. As I sat in that ballroom listening to the whispers spread from table to table, my mind drifted back to the afternoon everything changed. Not when I discovered the affair. When I discovered the affair wasn't the whole story. 3 weeks after Frank Donnelly showed me the photographs of Eric and Ashley together, he called again. His voice sounded different this time. More cautious. Linda, I found something strange. I was sitting in my office on Riverside Drive reviewing furniture orders for a home we'd staged in Dublin, Ohio. My stomach immediately tightened. What is it? I'd rather show you. That answer never leads anywhere good. An hour later, I was sitting across from him again. Frank slid a second folder across his desk. I opened it. The first photograph showed Ashley getting into a pickup truck outside a coffee shop. The second showed her hugging a man I had never seen before. The third showed them kissing in a parking lot. I looked up. Who is he? Greg Turner. Never heard of him. Local contractor, owns a remodeling company. I stared at the photos. They look serious. Frank nodded. They are. For a moment, I couldn't process what I was seeing. Ashley was having an affair with my husband. But she was also seeing another man. At the same time, Frank opened his notebook. This relationship appears to have been going on almost as long as the one with Eric. I leaned back in my chair. The room suddenly felt smaller. So she's cheating on my husband with another man. He gave a small shrug. Looks that way. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was absurd. The entire situation had become so ridiculous that my brain struggled to catch up. For months, I had imagined Ashley and Eric secretly building some romantic future together. Now it appeared neither one of them knew the full story. As painful as everything was, that discovery changed something inside me. It wasn't relief. But it removed the illusion. This wasn't some grand love story. It was deception. Plain and simple. I drove home that day and sat in my kitchen for nearly an hour. My coffee went cold. The refrigerator hummed quietly. Outside, a neighbor walked his dog. Normal life continued while mine seemed to be unraveling. Eventually, I called my attorney. Her name was Susan Keller. I'd hired her years earlier for business matters. She was practical, intelligent, and impossible to intimidate. After hearing everything, she gave me advice I didn't want. Do nothing. I frowned. What do you mean? I mean, don't confront them. They've been lying to me for almost a year. I understand. Then why should I stay quiet? Because angry people make mistakes. That sentence stayed with me. Angry people make mistakes. Susan explained that if divorce became necessary, preparation mattered. Emotions could wait. Paperwork couldn't. So I listened. Over the next several months, I began quietly rebuilding my life behind the scenes. I updated business records, reviewed financial accounts, met with accountants, created new estate documents, changed beneficiaries where appropriate. Everything legal. Everything documented. Nothing dramatic. The hardest part wasn't the paperwork. It was pretending. Every family barbecue felt like theater. Every holiday dinner felt exhausting. Ashley still hugged me, still called me cousin, still smiled across the table. Sometimes I wondered how she could do it. Then I stopped wondering. Some questions don't have satisfying answers. Around Christmas, Eric surprised me. Not with honesty, with guilt. One evening he came home carrying flowers. Yellow roses. My favorite. He cooked dinner, asked about my day, offered to watch a movie. For a few hours he acted like the husband I'd married. That version of him briefly returned, and that made everything worse. Because it reminded me what I was losing. Or thought I was losing. Later that night, while he slept beside me, I sat awake, staring at the ceiling. Part of me wanted to forgive him. Part of me wanted to expose everything. Part of me wanted my old life back. Instead, I waited. Some nights, patience feels a lot like loneliness. By spring, Frank had assembled an impressive amount of evidence: hotel records, photos, text messages, dates, timelines. The truth sat inside several thick folders. Yet I still hadn't told Eric I knew. I wasn't ready. Then an unexpected opportunity arrived. The Children's Hope Hospital Charity Gala. The event was one of the biggest annual fundraisers in Columbus. Business owners attended, doctors, community leaders, local politicians, church members, families. Nearly everyone Ashley cared about impressing. She had recently joined one of the event committees. Naturally, she planned to attend. So did Eric. The gala was scheduled for October. About 6 weeks before the event, Frank called again. This time, his news nearly made me spill my coffee. I spoke with Greg. I blinked.
You what?
He contacted me. Why? Because he's starting to suspect Ashley is lying to him. I sat down slowly. Apparently, Ashley had been telling Greg a very different story. According to Greg, she claimed she was ending things with Eric. She insisted their relationship was over. She told him she wanted a future with him. The same promises she'd apparently been making to Eric. The woman was running two completely different relationships simultaneously, and somehow neither man had figured it out. What happens now? I asked. Frank hesitated. Honestly, I think eventually the whole thing explodes. At the time, I agreed. I just assumed the explosion would happen later. Then 2 weeks before the gala, Greg discovered something. Ashley was pregnant, and she told him the baby was his. I remember staring at Frank in disbelief. What? He nodded. That's what she told him. My mind immediately jumped to Eric. Did he know? Was Ashley telling him something different? The answer arrived 3 days later. One of Frank's sources forwarded screenshots. Ashley had informed Eric that he was the father. I sat at my kitchen table reading those messages 3 times. Then 4. Then 5. Ashley was telling both men they were the father. For several minutes, I simply stared out the window. The leaves were beginning to change color. A school bus rolled through the neighborhood. Somewhere a lawnmower started. Ordinary sounds. Extraordinary situation. Finally, I laughed. A short, tired laugh. Because reality had become stranger than anything I could have imagined. A week later, Frank called again. Greg wants to talk to you. I nearly refused. Then curiosity won. We met at a diner outside Grove City. Greg was taller than I expected. Early 40s. Work boots. Calloused hands. The kind of man who looked uncomfortable indoors. He seemed embarrassed. Ashamed. Angry. Mostly confused. For nearly 2 hours we compared timelines. Stories. Messages. Excuses. By the end of lunch, one thing became clear. Ashley had been manipulating both of us. And Eric had no idea. When we finally stood to leave, Greg shook his head. I feel like an idiot. I understood exactly what he meant. Before leaving, he asked one final question. What are you going to do? I thought about it. Then I smiled. I think I'll wait. That answer confused him. It wouldn't confuse him for long. Because sitting in that ballroom now with Ashley standing on stage and 200 guests staring in shock, I glanced toward the entrance doors. Right on schedule. They were beginning to open. The ballroom doors opened. At first, nobody paid much attention. All eyes were still focused on Ashley. She stood near the stage, gripping the microphone so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Eric sat frozen beside me. The whispers had grown louder. Every table seemed to be having its own version of the same conversation. Then a few people near the back turned around. A path slowly opened through the crowd. And Greg Turner walked in. The moment Ashley saw him, her entire face changed. I've never forgotten that expression. Not because it was dramatic. Because it was instant. 1 second she looked confident. The next she looked terrified. Real terror. The kind that arrives before your brain has time to hide it. Her eyes widened. The color drained from her cheeks. The microphone slipped slightly in her hand. For a moment I thought she might faint. Instead, she just stared. Greg kept walking. Steady. Calm. Purposeful. He wasn't dressed for a confrontation. No flashy entrance. No dramatic gesture. Just jeans, boots, and a navy sports coat. A regular guy walking through a hotel ballroom. Yet somehow he commanded more attention than anyone else in the room. People began looking back and forth between Ashley and Greg, trying to understand. Trying to connect dots they couldn't yet see. Ashley finally found her voice. What are you doing here? The microphone amplified every word. Greg stopped several feet from the stage. I could ask you the same thing. The room grew even quieter. Ashley swallowed. I don't know what you're talking about. Several people exchanged puzzled looks. Eric frowned. His confusion was obvious. This wasn't part of the story Ashley had prepared. Greg looked up at her. Then he spoke clearly enough for everyone to hear. Why don't you tell them what you told me 3 weeks ago? Ashley didn't answer. You told me the baby was mine. The words landed like a bowling ball dropped onto concrete. Gasps erupted throughout the ballroom. Someone near the back actually stood up. Eric turned toward Ashley so fast his chair nearly tipped over. What? Ashley looked trapped. For the first time all evening she had no speech ready, no performance, no prepared lines, just panic. Greg reached inside his jacket. Ashley immediately took a step backward. What are you doing? He pulled out a folder. Nothing more. A plain manila folder. The same kind you could buy at any office supply store. Yet Ashley reacted as if he had pulled out a weapon. And in a way he had. The truth can be dangerous. Greg held the folder against his side. I have text messages. Nobody spoke. I have appointment confirmations. Still silence. I have messages where you told me I was going to be a father. Ashley shook her head. You're lying. The denial sounded weak. Even she didn't seem convinced. Meanwhile, Eric looked completely lost. Like a man who had suddenly discovered he was reading the wrong map. He stood up. Ashley, what is he talking about? No answer. Ashley, she looked at him, then looked away. That was enough. You could almost see the realization hitting him. Not all at once, piece by piece. The way ice slowly cracks across a frozen lake. The affair had been real. That much was obvious. But now another possibility was staring him in the face. Maybe he wasn't special. Maybe he wasn't the chosen one. Maybe he'd simply been one option among several. I should have felt satisfied. Instead, I felt strangely sad. 15 years of marriage sat beside me looking completely broken. For a brief moment, I remembered the young man I'd met at church. The one who made me laugh. The one who carried me over the threshold of our first apartment. The one who promised forever. Then the moment passed. Reality returned. Ashley grabbed the microphone again. This is ridiculous. Nobody responded. She pointed at Greg. He's obsessed with me. That didn't help. A few skeptical expressions appeared around the room. The problem with lies is that once people catch one, they begin questioning all the others. Greg shook his head. No, Ashley. His voice remained calm, almost disappointingly calm. I just want the truth. The ballroom doors opened again. Several hotel staff members peeked inside, sensing something unusual was happening. Even they seemed curious. Near the front, one of the hospital board members quietly sat back down after apparently deciding this was no longer an event he could control. Then something happened that nearly made me laugh. An older gentleman named Walter Simmons slowly raised his hand. Walter was 78, retired, wealthy, and famously blunt. Ashley looked at him. Walter adjusted his glasses, then asked completely seriously, So exactly how many fathers are participating in this discussion? For 1 second, nobody reacted. Then a few nervous chuckles escaped. Someone snorted. Several guests covered their mouths. Even I had to bite my lip. Ashley looked horrified. Walter wasn't trying to be funny. That was the best part. He genuinely wanted clarification. The room suddenly felt less tense. Not because the situation had improved. Because absurdity had entered the conversation. And absurdity has a way of exposing people faster than anger. Ashley glared at Walter. Walter simply shrugged. I think it's a fair question. A few more laughs followed. Eric dropped back into his chair. His shoulders slumped. He looked exhausted. Greg remained where he stood. Patient. Waiting. Then Ashley did something that surprised me. She looked directly at me. Not Eric. Not Greg. Me. For the first time all evening, her confidence was completely gone. Under different circumstances, I might have felt sorry for her. Almost. Instead, she stared as if hoping I would rescue her. After everything she'd done. After months of lies. After publicly humiliating me. She still expected help. The realization was almost unbelievable. I met her gaze and said nothing. That silence seemed to affect her more than any speech could have. She looked away first. The whispers continued growing. Guests compared stories. Rumors spread from table to table. People began piecing together what was happening. But they still didn't know everything. Not even close. Because Greg's arrival wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. The real evidence was still waiting. The investigators' reports. The photographs. The financial records. The timelines. Everything I had spent months collecting. And for the first time all evening I realized the moment had arrived. I slowly stood from my chair. The movement immediately caught attention. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. Even Ashley noticed. I looked toward the stage. Then toward Eric. Then toward the 200 people who had gathered expecting a charity fundraiser and somehow found themselves watching a train wreck instead. I took a deep breath and began walking forward. The ballroom was so quiet that I could hear my heels against the floor. Every step seemed louder than it should have. I walked past tables filled with stunned faces. Neighbors, business owners, church friends, people I'd known for years. A few looked sympathetic. Others looked uncomfortable. Most simply looked curious. I couldn't blame them. Nothing like this had ever happened at a charity gala in Columbus. By the time I reached the stage, Ashley looked ready to bolt for the nearest exit. Greg remained near the front. Eric sat frozen at our table. I stopped beside Ashley. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I gently held out my hand. "May I have the microphone?" She hesitated. I raised an eyebrow. Slowly, she handed it over. The irony wasn't lost on me. A few minutes earlier, she'd used that microphone to humiliate me. Now she was surrendering it. I turned toward the audience. 200 people waited. I took a breath. First, I'd like to apologize to the Children's Hope Hospital Foundation. A few surprised expressions appeared. This fundraiser should be about helping children, not about my family. Several people nodded. I looked toward the board members. "I'm sorry your event became part of this." One of them offered a grateful smile. Then I turned back to the room. "As for what's happening tonight?" I paused. I've known about the affair for months. The reaction was immediate. Murmurs spread through the ballroom. Ashley blinked. Eric stared. "What?" he said quietly. I looked directly at him. "I found out 6 months ago." His face crumpled. Not dramatically. Just enough to reveal the shock underneath. I continued. At first I didn't want to believe it. I could hear my own heartbeat. But surprisingly, my hands weren't shaking anymore. The fear had already passed. Now there was only clarity. I hired a private investigator. That got everyone's attention. Even Walter straightened up in his chair. I reached into my purse and removed a thin folder. Not the entire file. Just enough. I didn't confront anyone. I looked at Eric. Not because I was weak. Then Ashley. Not because I was afraid. I let the silence settle. I waited because I wanted facts. For months I had imagined this moment differently. In some versions I screamed. In others I cried. In a few I threw things. Real life turned out much quieter. And somehow much stronger. I opened the folder. Inside were several photographs. I held them up. Not dramatically. Just plainly. These are from February. A photo of Ashley and Eric entering a hotel. Several guests leaned forward. These are from March. Another hotel. Another dinner. Another lie. Ashley closed her eyes. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered all the times she'd sat in my kitchen drinking coffee while pretending to care about me. The feeling disappeared. I handed the photographs to one of the board members nearest the stage. They quickly circulated. Gasps followed. Eric lowered his head. The room had seen enough to understand. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. Because the affair itself wasn't the biggest deception. I looked toward Greg. "Would you mind standing up for a moment?" Greg nodded. The room followed him with their eyes. I turned back to the audience. "A few months ago, my investigator discovered something unexpected." Ashley's shoulders tightened. I continued. "While Ashley was having a relationship with my husband, she was also involved with Greg." The whispers returned immediately. Ashley shook her head. "No." Her voice sounded small, almost childlike. "It's true." I looked toward Greg. "He has messages." Then toward Eric. "So do I." Eric stared at Ashley. The expression on his face was painful to watch. Not because he didn't deserve consequences, because reality was finally catching up to him. The man who had helped destroy our marriage was now discovering he'd been deceived too. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Eric stood, slowly, carefully, like someone carrying a heavy weight. "Ashley?" His voice cracked. "Tell me the truth." She didn't answer. Ashley. Still nothing. The silence itself became an answer. The room understood. So did Eric. He sat back down. I watched 15 years of certainty disappear from his face. Then Ashley suddenly snapped. Maybe panic finally overwhelmed her. Maybe she realized the situation couldn't be controlled anymore. Whatever the reason, she exploded. "This isn't fair." Several guests exchanged confused looks. Fair. The words seemed almost unbelievable. She pointed at me. You planned this? I nodded. Yes. The honesty startled her. I continued. I planned to protect myself. Another pause. I planned to learn the truth. I looked around the room. And I planned not to let other people decide my future. Ashley opened her mouth, then closed it. For once she had nothing left to say. That was when I delivered the final piece. The one nobody expected. Including Eric. I removed a second envelope from my purse. Susan had prepared it weeks earlier. I held it up. These are divorce papers. The room went silent again. I looked directly at Eric. They were filed 3 weeks ago. His eyes widened. You already filed? I nodded. Yes. For a moment he simply stared. The realization hit him hard. This wasn't an emotional reaction. This wasn't a woman acting out of anger. The decision had already been made. The future had already changed. He was just learning about it later than everyone else. Ashley looked equally shocked. Apparently she'd assumed I would spend months fighting to keep my marriage. Begging. Competing. Pleading. Instead, I'd quietly moved on. The truth seemed to disturb her more than anything else. Then came the moment I'll never forget. Eric stood again. Linda, his voice sounded smaller than I'd ever heard it. Can we talk privately? The room watched, waiting. I thought about all the nights I'd cried alone. All the lies, all the manipulation, all the chances he'd had to tell the truth. Then I shook my head. No. The answer wasn't angry. Just final. He looked down. I handed the microphone back to the event coordinator. My part was finished. But before I stepped away, I turned toward Ashley one last time. She looked exhausted, defeated, lost. The woman who had entered the ballroom expecting victory now stood completely exposed. I held her gaze, then said quietly, You thought tonight was my humiliation. The room listened. It was actually your introduction. Nobody laughed. Nobody cheered. This wasn't a movie. Real life doesn't work that way. Instead, something more satisfying happened. People simply saw her clearly. And sometimes that's the most powerful consequence of all. As I stepped away from the stage, the audience remained silent. Not because they were shocked anymore. Because they understood exactly what had happened. And for the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph. Not revenge. Relief. The truth was finally out. 6 months later, I was sitting on my back porch with a cup of coffee when I realized something surprising. I hadn't thought about Ashley in almost 2 weeks. That may not sound like much, but after everything that happened, it felt like a milestone. The morning was cold enough for a light jacket. Ohio winters have a way of lingering longer than anyone wants. A thin layer of frost still covered parts of the backyard. My golden retriever Bailey was lying beside my chair watching squirrels with more optimism than success. For the first time in a very long while, life felt normal. Not perfect, just normal. And after the year I'd had, normal felt pretty wonderful. The divorce was finalized 3 months after the gala. Eric didn't fight it, at least not legally. Emotionally was another story. For weeks he called, texted, left voicemails, sent emails. Sometimes he apologized. Sometimes he blamed himself. Sometimes he blamed Ashley. Once he even blamed stress. That conversation lasted about 30 seconds. Eventually the messages became less frequent. Then they stopped altogether. I wasn't cruel about it. I simply understood something I hadn't understood before. An apology doesn't automatically rebuild trust. Some things once broken remain broken. My attorney Susan had done excellent work. Months of preparation paid off. The business remained secure. My finances stayed intact. The process was painful, but it wasn't chaotic. Looking back, I'm grateful I listened to her advice. Anger would have made me reckless. Preparation gave me options. As for Ashley, the aftermath was messy, not because I created problems for her, because reality finally caught up with her. A paternity test eventually settled the biggest question. Eric wasn't the father. The news spread through our extended family faster than anyone expected. Apparently, several relatives learned about the results before Ashley did. Family gossip travels at impressive speed. The actual father turned out to be Greg, at least biologically. But that didn't create the happy ending Ashley seemed to expect. Greg wasn't interested in continuing the relationship, not after discovering how extensively she'd lied. To be fair, I couldn't blame him. He wasn't angry when we spoke later. Mostly disappointed. One afternoon he called me, not to discuss Ashley, to thank me. I know this sounds strange, he said, but you probably saved me years of trouble. I laughed. That's definitely not what I expected when this started. He laughed too. It was probably the healthiest conversation either of us had experienced in months. Eventually we hung up. Neither of us ever called again. Some people enter your life for a season. Nothing more. The most surprising part of the whole experience wasn't losing my marriage. It was discovering who stayed. Friends I hadn't spoken with in years reached out. Neighbors checked in. Clients sent encouraging messages. Even people from church stopped by with casseroles and coffee. One woman I barely knew dropped off homemade banana bread and simply said, "You handled yourself well." Then she left. No questions. No gossip. Just kindness. Those moments mattered more than the dramatic ones. Pain has a way of revealing character. Not only in the people who hurt you, in the people who support you too. My daughter Emily probably helped me the most. She was 22 and finishing graduate school. When everything happened, I worried she'd feel trapped in the middle. Instead, she surprised me. One evening, we were eating dinner at a small Italian restaurant near campus. Halfway through the meal, she looked at me and said, "Mom, can I tell you something?" "Of course." "I think you've been stronger than you realize." I smiled. "I haven't always felt strong." "I know." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "That's why it counts." I've thought about that conversation many times since. Strength isn't pretending you're okay. It's continuing even when you're not. There were difficult days after the divorce. Of course there were. Some mornings I woke up feeling angry. Other mornings I felt sad. Occasionally I felt embarrassed. Then I remembered something important. Their choices weren't my failure. That realization took time. Longer than I expected. Healing usually does. By the following October, the next annual charity gala arrived. Several friends asked whether I planned to attend. At first, I considered skipping it. The memories were still fresh. That ballroom had witnessed one of the most painful nights of my life. Part of me wanted nothing to do with it. Then I reconsidered. Why should I surrender a place because of someone else's behavior? So I bought a ticket. The night of the event, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror getting ready. Nothing extravagant. A navy blue dress. Simple jewelry. Comfortable shoes. At 44, comfort wins more arguments than fashion. Bailey watched me from the hallway. I smiled. "You think I look okay?" His tail wagged enthusiastically. "Good enough." The Marriott ballroom looked almost identical to the year before. Same chandeliers. Same round tables. Same stage. Different life. As I walked inside, a few people recognized me. Several smiled. One couple waved. Walter Simmons even approached carrying a plate of appetizers. "Good news," he said. I laughed. "What's that?" I checked before coming. I raised an eyebrow. "Checked what?" "Nobody's claiming surprise pregnancies tonight." I nearly choked laughing. Walter grinned, then wandered away toward the buffet. Some people never change. And honestly, that's not always a bad thing. As the evening continued, I realized something unexpected. Nobody was whispering. Nobody was staring. Nobody was talking about the scandal. The story that once felt enormous had become old news. Life had moved forward. And so had I. That's probably the lesson I carry with me now. The revenge wasn't standing on that stage. It wasn't exposing lies. It wasn't watching people face consequences. The real victory came later. The day I stopped organizing my life around what happened. The day I became excited about the future again. The day I realized peace feels better than payback. If you've ever been betrayed, I hope you remember this: someone's dishonesty doesn't define your worth. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stay patient, learn the truth, and keep moving forward. And if this story meant something to you, thank you for spending this time with me. I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences. Until next time, take care of yourself and the people who truly deserve a place in your life.